Welcome to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast, where we talk with the nation's top experts about today's toughest parenting challenges. Whether you're concerned about your child's development, learning, behavior, or you just want to make family time more enjoyable, we share the practical solutions and tools that can help.
Hey, podcast listeners. Welcome to the Exceptional Parenting Podcast, brought to you by Torchlight. I'm your host, Stefanie Boucher, and today we're going to be talking about the process of transitioning your child from early intervention into special education or the school setting generally. If you are the parent of a child with a disability, you may already know that your child turning 3 is a big deal, and there is a lot of both logistical and emotional stuff that takes place at that time as you help your child evolve into this new phase of life. Joining me today is writer, author, and mother Jamie Sumner. Jamie is the author of Unbound, Finding Freedom from Unrealistic Expectations of Motherhood. She has also got several books on the docket that are going to be coming out in the near future. She has a middle grade novel called Roll With It, which will be published by Simon & Schuster in the fall of 2019. That's part of a 3-book deal. And she is also going to be publishing Keep On Superhero, which is coming out in the spring of 2020. Jamie's work has also been featured in publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and numerous places around the web. Jamie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so happy to have you. I'm going to have you kind of kick things off today because I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your son. You've done a lot of writing. A lot of your work has been based around your experiences as a mother. So I was just hoping you could tell us a little bit about your son and how things started out with early intervention, and maybe that could kind of wind into, we'll get into a little bit of the nitty gritty stuff, like, how early intervention was initiated, what that process was like, and the types of services that he received.
Sure. So my son is Charlie, and he is 6 now, about to be 7. And he actually just started public kindergarten this past fall, which of course I will talk about because that was a very big deal to me. Charlie's official diagnosis is cerebral palsy, and he's in a wheelchair, and he is mostly nonverbal. He does use a speaking device that he's had for about a year now, maybe a little less than a year. And like any communication, it takes years to develop. So we're kind of still in the process of that. He also, his first diagnosis that we actually got officially confirmed the day that I went into labor, was Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, which it's a pretty rare syndrome. It's an overgrowth chromosomal defect that causes overgrowth and the regulation of the pituitary gland. So it's not just that he was bigger, it's that certain parts of him were bigger. So it can affect different organs, but in his case, in particular, it affected his tongue. So I went into preterm labor at 30 weeks. And because we just received the diagnosis that day, we knew to drive to the teaching hospital instead of the fancy, pampered hospital that we had toured, because they would be there waiting for us to take care of Charlie. And he was immediately intubated and stayed in the NICU for about 10 weeks while we tried to figure out how to work around his big tongue. And, we kept trying everything you could think of to help him breathe on his own without having to resort to any kind of surgery. But unfortunately, we felt in the long run to make sure that he was safe and really ensure that we could take him home and take care of him ourselves. He came home with a tracheotomy, which was actually amazing. It saved his life. I know it saved his life because he came home and was able to thrive without worrying about that airway. And he also ended up a few months after that getting a G tube. So breathing and feeding were the 2 hardest things, and we had to have medical intervention for that. But going back to the early intervention, we knew that Charlie was medically fragile from the very beginning. And then his 30-day ultrasound head scan actually revealed the PVL, the brain damage that would later lead to his cerebral palsy diagnosis. So we knew then as well, had a pretty good idea of the extent to which he would need help. I mean, you can never really know, but we knew he would need it. So we started the process for early intervention while we were still in the NICU. We had counselors there that we met with who kind of explained the process to us. And before we even left, we had set up an appointment with early intervention, the coordinator, to come out to our home once Charlie was stable and test him to see if he qualified.
Right.
So that's how it started.
So what types of services did your son receive during those early years? Tell us a little bit about, the types of practitioners you saw and, did they come to your home? Where did the services take place?
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, the bizarre scenario, I'm sure if you're a parent to a child with special needs that you find yourself in when you're kind of being tested for things like this is that you want to prove how capable and independent and thriving your child is.
Sure.
But in order to get the services, they kind of have to fail the test in order to qualify.
Yeah.
So it was that, dichotomy between this is my precious baby and look what he can do, but also we really need your help. And because he qualified in every area, we had a lot of services. So there's two ways you can go about it. And we had an option. We could meet with our different therapists at their location. So there were certain therapists that you would qualify and you could go get therapy at the office or the hospital or where the clinic, wherever it was. Because Charlie had a trach and was kind of immunocompromised because of that, I mean, I carried around a backpack that had a suction machine in it that I would, suction out the trach several times an hour. So he could not be, you don't want that kind of child getting around germs unnecessarily. So we chose to have the therapist come to our home. Not everyone gets that choice, of course. If your child isn't necessarily homebound, sometimes you don't always have that option, but we did. So we chose initially to have therapists come to our home. And we had the general developmental therapist who was associated with early intervention. And she came once a week and to do a check-in. And we also had a feeding therapist who later on also took on speech. And we had a physical therapist and an occupational therapist as well. So I will say, I would encourage parents, if you're listening and you're just getting into this, I didn't know that I had a say necessarily in who I got assigned. Like you feel like you're so grateful for the system to be providing this that you almost don't want to rock the boat. But I would say do not be scared to voice your concerns if you feel like a therapist isn't clicking with your child or here's an example. We had an occupational therapist who was assigned to us that was just kind of fresh out of school, which isn't a bad thing. But she decided to try some feeding therapy as part of her occupational therapy, which wasn't necessarily in her wheelhouse, but she was going to try it. And I was okay with that. She asked me. I was okay with that. However, there was a moment when I stepped away to go to the bathroom because even that is difficult to do when you have a baby with trach. So I was like, I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Sure.
Take a minute. And while I was gone, she actually fed Charlie a wheat thin. And he was, those are hard crackers. And he had an enlarged tongue. And this was when he was probably 6 months old or 7. Like he was just starting solid foods. And he promptly choked. And I heard it. He wasn't making noises through the trach because it bypasses the vocal cords, but I could hear him, the wheezy cough. So I ran out, stuck my finger down his throat and got it out. And I had no problem. That was like the turning point with, okay, I'm going to not have this person come back. Yeah. And it's not, I didn't have anything against her as a human being, but if this is my child and it's his safety, I'm going to voice my concerns. And I got a little bit better about that. Like when Charlie got older and we were able to get the trach out, which was a miracle at around 1.5 years, he had tongue surgery to reduce the size of his tongue at 7 months old. So after that, it was just a process. And he still has a big tongue, but it's better. So he could actually close his mouth and breathe. We wanted to get out of the house more. At that point, because we'd been trapped basically, and he wanted to be out and it was good for his socialization. So I started to request therapists that were out of the house, which meant saying goodbye to our old therapists, some of which we loved. One in particular she was very holistic, but as Charlie got older and he needed more medical equipment to help him, like leg braces and possibly a wheelchair or a gait trainer, she said she didn't feel qualified writing those evaluations because that wasn't what she normally dealt with. And she was honest with me and I was honest with her to say, we would like to pursue this with him. And so we said bye and we got someone else. And all of those things are the kind of, the things you don't think about in the beginning, but you kind of have to just navigate through as your child gets older in the system.
I'm sure there are so many things that parents can't even begin to think about until they actually happen. But thank you so much for bringing out the point about advocating for your child, because I think that that's a very common issue, that parents feel like they don't have a say, and you absolutely do. So thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about the transition to special education-based services versus early intervention. I'm curious to know how you felt about this transition as it approached, because it's a big deal. Life can really change a lot at this point. So as he approached his third birthday and you knew that these services that he and your family had come to rely on were nearing an end and you had to go into sort of a different system, what types of things were you worried about?
So by age 3, Charlie didn't have the trach anymore and he didn't have the G-tube. But because of the cerebral palsy diagnosis, I had stopped kind of taking home the milestone charts from the pediatrician at that point, just because we knew Charlie was operating at his own pace on his own time. And I had kind of come to terms with that. However, to give you a little backstory, when Charlie I had boy-girl twins just after Charlie turned 2. So
life got very busy.
We now had a very, very busy household. And he actually, we decided to start him in a preschool to help with his socialization. And we had found a private preschool that actually was a special needs inclusive school that had a clinic attached to it. So a therapy clinic attached to it. So we couldn't have asked for a better place to start him.
And how did you find that school?
Well, okay. So we researched, a lot of research, because he had started therapies in different clinics around town. I quizzed all of his therapists.
Okay.
Where do kids go? What are the best schools for preschools for kids like Charlie? Because he can't go to a typical preschool. And so I did my research. And we just happened, when I found out I was pregnant, we literally couldn't fit in our house anymore that we had been in. So we moved into the same neighborhood as my mom, actually. And this preschool, we had not considered it because it was kind of too far to drive to. This preschool quickly became we were 15 minutes away now. So we started to consider it. So that's how we found the preschool. And that's how we actually managed to get in was, I started really early and visited and we actually started some therapy in the clinic there before he started school there. So I felt comfortable with that, which was great because this first day was the day that I actually went into labor with the twins. So I didn't get to take him. My mother did bring me his little backpack to pack while I was in the hospital, which was something. So
such a big day. That must have been so hard.
Now, luckily I had other things to distract me.
You were occupied.
Yeah. So he started at age 2. And that being said, this school day was amazing. It was 9 to 3. And over the course of that age, 2 to 3, he learned to nap with his peers. I never thought this kid would nap on a mat in a room with, 10 other kids, but he did. And he proved to me that he actually could adapt because I hadn't really given him the chance before then. And I may not have if I hadn't felt safe enough. Secure enough, but right. So he learned to do that. And he was actually getting feeding therapy during lunch in his classroom with his classmates. And they would cheer him on. Like they would literally cheer, chew, chew, chew as he practiced chewing. And it was amazing. So this was a good dilemma to have. But when he aged out of the early intervention at age 3, so we had been able to pay for the private preschool because most of the therapies were covered.
Right.
And we just hit this terrifying wall of now we actually have to talk about this with our insurance and see what they're going to cover and think about the special education system that the public schools offer. And if we want to transition Charlie again out of his private preschool into the school system, because at age 3, you can do all the evaluations again, basically, that you did when your child is a baby.
That's right.
But in the school system, and then you can see what you qualify for. Well, of course, still, Charlie qualified for the full thing, but the full thing was, in our area, an 8 to 11 4-day-a-week program. And while financially that was great because they would cover therapies, Charlie socially at age 3 had just really started to thrive in his school environment that was a 9 to 3 day where he ate lunch and slept and played with his friends. And so we faced this really hard decision of, do we pull him out of that environment to go into this system where, you know, their main focus is to help kids prepare for school. So the kind of therapies he would start to get at that point would be the preschool prep for kindergarten kind of therapies.
Yes.
Whereas early intervention therapies are everything. You know, they're all encompassing. They're how to walk, how to stretch. You know, we did outside swim therapy, which was, I mean, I could talk for a whole podcast about how amazing swim therapy was for a kid with cerebral palsy with tight joints. He walked for the first time in a pool.
Wow.
With weights on his legs. And we did horseback riding therapy and all these other things. And at age 3 is when every decision came to a head, basically, of what we were going to do with the finally laid plan that we had kind of crafted now that it was ending. So we went all the way through the testing process because we wanted to do our due diligence, but kind of in our hearts, we knew we would want to keep him at his preschool. Unfortunately, that also meant paying for preschool and continuing paying for the private therapies within the clinic there, because the special education system isn't going to send therapists to his preschool. He would have to go there and be pulled out of his preschool day to go there. And you have to commit to the 8 to 11 day. You can't just drop in for therapy.
Sure.
So it was basically, we were in a situation of all or nothing. So what we decided, it was very difficult. And honestly, we didn't make the decision once. We made it over and over again over the course of basically age 3 to 6, because there were definitely times where financially we could barely afford it. And our insurance switched several times as my husband switched jobs. And there was like, you know, that 90-day gap where you don't have insurance.
Yeah. And then there's the anxiety that at the new job, will the new insurance cover the same stuff? And how will it be different? Yeah.
My husband, Jody, he learned that was the first question he had to ask in interviews. You know, when he got to the second round is basically, what's your insurance like? Yeah. You know, luckily he works for healthcare companies and they tend to be pretty fair with the insurance, but I applied for several grants, and I would encourage families out there to do that, to do your research and see what you qualify for. We did not qualify for SSI, even though we appealed several times. We're still not sure why we don't qualify for SSI. So I applied for grants, and his preschool actually has some financial aid-based scholarships.
Oh, okay. And a lot of schools do, and that's something worth noting to parents is that people don't always know to ask, and that's
right. You
important.
have to ask, and ask your therapist that you're already familiar with if they know of any that have worked for some of their families. Ask everybody.
Okay, that's a great tip.
And and that helped us make it from age 3 to 6. Piece it together enough to continue there and keep that routine and stability and comfort and still get the therapies that he needed.
And somehow you made it out the other side. So how
miraculously.
It's not an easy road to travel, but you clearly have gained a lot of wisdom about it along the way. How did you know that your son was ready to transition into the public school system? Because you mentioned he's in kindergarten now. What was that decision like?
So that was not so much a decision.
Yeah.
That was basically, I looked around at his school that he was in for preschool only went up until
So it had an age limit to it.
Right, correct. However, ironically, they opened a kindergarten this year. So we thought we were leaving, and then they gave us this option to not leave all of a sudden. But we had already kind of reconciled ourselves to public school, and we didn't want to send him to private kindergarten and then have him adjust all over again in first grade. Yes. Because that seemed like a bigger transition. So we decided to continue with the public school system and do what we had not done at age 3 and actually send him to public school. Because there weren't any private schools in the area. I mean, there were several schools that specialized in kids with learning disabilities. But as far as Charlie's physical disabilities, the public school system was very well adapted and tried and tested with kids like Charlie. I will also add, we did when we made our decision to move to the area that we moved to, it was to be close to family, but it was more than that because this is the best public school system in the county. So, I mean, in the state. So we made that decision knowing that public school was going to be our path forward.
Sure. How was the transition for him into public school? What has that been like for him? Are schedules very different than what he experienced at his preschool? How well did he adjust in the beginning? Was it and was it tougher for him or for you?
You read my mind. It was much more difficult for me than him. I don't think I give Charlie enough credit for being adaptive in areas like this. I maybe because I'm not. Yeah. Because for me, it seems like such a daunting thing. And so
it's your job to worry about him.
Right.
And that's what you've done every minute of his life since he was born. So there's a letting go process involved where you feel like, no one can take care of my child the way I can. And it's very, very hard to have your child go off and trust that they're going to be able to adapt themselves with the help of, other loving, responsible people, of course.
Right. Well, and I think the thing for me with Charlie is that because he's mostly nonverbal, I was entering a place where, when I see him in the afternoon, I can't just say, "How was your day?" and he can tell me. So it was like sending him into the abyss and just wondering if it was going okay, or if it's not, how I was going to figure that out. And I was more nervous about kindergarten than any other transition that I'd had with him because the public school system felt so big. And we did all of his evaluations in the school that he was going to be attending in the spring before he would start in the fall. And everyone was very nice. But during those meetings, the people you meet, you don't necessarily know, oh, yes, this is going to be his special education teacher. Like you have no insurance that the people you're talking to are going to be the people in charge of him when classes get set and schedules get set and aides get set. So It was great. I felt comfortable with those people as much as I could, but also knowing that they may not be his people. So when fall started, we were very lucky to get the special education teacher that we had met with that summer. We did not get the kindergarten teacher, but we did get the special education teacher. And she just happened to be a person that gets Charlie. She knows how to get past the tantrums or the silence or his really great way of manipulating adults because he's adorable to get them to treat him like he is a baby instead of a 6-year-old kid. Like he's very good at just getting out of activities because he wants to hug you and smile at you and blow kisses at you. And
smart
people,
boy.
it works on me way more than it should as well. So she actually has been amazing for us. However, I will say, if you're a parent out there about to send your child to kindergarten, one of the things that I did not do in the beginning that I have done since, but I wish I'd started from the get-go was, and this is learning how to ask for what you want for your child. This is learning to advocate in a way that you're going to feel kind of pushy or demanding or whatever it is, but it's not. It's just the necessity. So what I wish I had asked for was a sheet to send home either once a week or daily if you can, that lists essentially the things that I'm most curious about his day. So did he feed himself independently at lunch? Did he move his wheelchair independently in the halls today? Are there any particular times during the day where he is the most tired or the most upset? Or how are peer interactions today? And basically, the special ed teacher and I came up with a sheet that specifically is for Charlie that, you know, his feeding therapist can fill in that day. If she met with him that day, she can tell me how lunch went in the cafeteria. There are notes for the special ed teacher or for his physical therapist. Did he participate in gym and how is gym adapted for him in his wheelchair? So that I do know how his day went when he comes home, even if he can't always tell me. And I just didn't think about it because, again, public school is so overwhelming in the beginning. I didn't think about it because there were so many other things to think about. Like, is he going to ride the bus or not? Or what foods do I pack for him? Because they don't have necessarily the same food pantry microwave system that his preschool had and all of those kinds of things. And no nap. I mean,
no nap is huge.
He had napped until kindergarten, and his day is okay. We did decide to do the bus because he's obsessed.
I was going to ask you. That was one of my questions: is did he ride the bus? Yeah.
Ironically, that was like the easiest decision because every time he sees a bus, we actually have to follow it for a while, no matter where we're going, just so he can see the bus.
So he really wanted to ride the bus.
I've driven across town next to a bus. It's like a really slow reenactment of the movie Speed. Like we just drive next to the bus just so he can watch it. So yeah, so he is riding the bus. The bus might be his favorite part of school because it's the two bus ladies, the aide on the bus and the bus driver. There's only 3 kids on the bus. He has them wrapped around his little finger. They string lights. They strung Christmas lights up. They sing songs. Wow. I think he wishes we lived farther from school.
So he could be on the bus longer.
Right. So
That's
he does
cute.
ride the bus, and they're great. And so they pick him up around 8:20, and he doesn't get home from school until almost 4.
That's a long day.
It's a very long day with no nap. And it took him, that made me very nervous. It took him about 2 weeks to fully transition and not be so exhausted. Because the other thing we had to think about is, are we going to continue any outside therapies, and when are we going to have those therapies?
Yes,
because
it's already such a long day.
Right.
Yeah.
And we continued once a week getting speech with his speech therapist at his old preschool because it's still the clinic and they see kids all the way up through 18 because she's really good. He uses a Toby Dynavox, which is his speaking device, which is it looks like an iPad, basically, touchscreen iPad. And she is very well versed on that. I actually organized a session where she came to his kindergarten and did a training session with his speech therapist there and his special education teacher. And she trained them on it. So that was amazing. So we stayed with her. So he does that after school 1 day a week. And we stayed with horseback riding therapy, hippotherapy, which he does once a week. Those first 2 weeks, I thought we were going to have to quit everything because he does it after school and he was so tired. He was just crying in tears.
Yeah. For him, the adjustment was probably a little rough for many reasons. One of them being is that he simply didn't have the nap and he was tired and it was a long day.
Very tired.
And then plus all of the new stuff, the new people. Do you feel like did he like the new people that he was around? Was it difficult for him to adjust to having new teachers, new therapists? What was that like?
Again, we're kind of coming up against the things that I wish I could just ask Charlie directly.
Yeah.
Because it was hard to fit. That was one of the things that it was hard for me to figure out is I didn't know if he really was clicking with his therapist or not, or his kindergarten teacher. I knew his special education teacher, he really, his sped teacher was great, but it really wasn't until I kind of worked with her to create that sheet to send home and started emailing those therapists to really ask, how is he clicking with you? I could not, I didn't need to just sit at home and wonder. I could really ask because they wanted to know, he seems to be extra tired at this time, or what do you do when he doesn't want to do XYZ? And so we actually were able to talk through some things, and he's really clicked with his physical therapist, mostly because she's very good at adapting on the fly in gym. Like, we're playing soccer. Here, Charlie, here's a hockey stick. Use that to hit the soccer ball. to your friend from your wheelchair. And so she makes it very interactive for him. So that was good. But again, it was the kind of thing where I had to learn to ask the things I was wondering instead of just
communicating with your child's school and with the multiple people that, your children interact with there we can't stress the importance of that enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced a time when you weren't in agreement with your son's IEP team? And if so, how did you work through it?
I think you mean in the public school system, not early intervention?
I suppose it could be either.
I think the biggest, it's not necessarily a disagreement, but the biggest issue that I had was, this gets into language, but Charlie's expressive language is, almost nothing. So he can say a few words and he can say, and yes. So you can kind of do a yes-no situation with him. But his receptive language and what he understands is average to above average. So the tendency by therapists and team members and his fellow students even is to treat Charlie as younger and less intuitive than he is, less intelligent than he is. And so the biggest thing that I had to essentially fight for and convince them of is how smart he actually is, so that they push him and don't just let him sit there and be adorable. Yes. So that, I would say, is the biggest thing for us. And a lot of that was, okay, you're sending these homework sheets home that he can't necessarily do because you're asking him to say these vowel sounds and then say these words and then XYZ. Well, he can't say them. There's got to be another way that he can prove to you that he knows these things beyond the standard homework sheet. And so at parent-teacher conferences, I requested sheets made just for Charlie, or really any kid that's nonverbal, that he could do to prove that he knows what he knows.
Yeah. Asking for those accommodations is essential. It can be very difficult for nonverbal kids, particularly, to show what it is that they know. But kids with all different types of disabilities, kids who have, dysgraphia or dyslexia, there's all sorts of instances where children need other ways to be able to prove what they know and can do. So we really appreciate your advice on how to stay on top of that. It's tricky.
Well, and I'll say this, I would not have thought of that report sheet coming back to me or adapting that homework sheet if I had not spoken to another mom. This was a conversation that we had over hippotherapy because it's a very small, close-knit world, special needs world. And her son had gone to my son's preschool and they also did hippotherapy together. And her son started kindergarten the year before Charlie. And she told me what she had figured out. And she even brought me a sample of the sheet that she had his teachers fill out. And it is so helpful to talk to other moms who have been through it, like either at that school or just in the schools in your area. If you know other moms or dads of kids with special needs that have already fought that battle, then ask for their advice so you don't have to fight it all over again anew. I wouldn't have done what I did without the help of other parents telling me, oh, make sure you do this or think about this and that kind of thing.
Right. It can be hard to find them sometimes, but well worth it when you do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You are sort of a pioneer, I would say. You're really coming into your own in the area of promoting inclusion within communities and within the media. And that's something that we certainly love to try and do here as well. We mentioned your book, your middle grade novel that's coming out next year called Roll With It. And that is about a girl with a disability. Actually, you can tell us a little bit about it and why you wrote it.
Sure. Disability is actually a hard thing for teachers to discuss in the classroom or to cover as a topic in literature. I mean, most teachers have read Wonder and can kind of discuss that book in general terms. But that's a kid who had a physical disability, but everything else intellectually, he just was a normal kid. But there are so many other books now of kids who are nonverbal or on a particular autism diagnosis that is not familiar or is hard to discuss. And so Roll With It is a book about a girl who has cerebral palsy. She's 12. Her name's Ellie. She is in a wheelchair. But I would say, and this is kind of something I would think about for any kid in anywhere, is when you read books about kids with disabilities, ultimately it's just a story about a kid. You know, it's about a kid with a disability, yes, but the things that all kids go through and the feelings that all kids kind of share, especially in that middle grade, middle school area, are pretty universal. No matter what the cause of them are, the feelings are universal. So Roll With It is about Ellie, and she and her mom moved to a kind of the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, from a bigger city to help with her grandfather who's suffering from Alzheimer's. So it's like already hard going into a hard situation. However, Ellie's like the most spunky, hopeful person you could meet. And they move into a trailer, which if you can imagine in your mind, a wheelchair in a trailer.
Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting, and she goes to a school that hasn't had to deal with a kid like her before. So she's kind of paving the way in this town and trying to say, hey, I'm not just a kid with CP. I'm all of these other things. Leave me alone about the wheelchair and just let me do my thing. And it's mostly about a kid who wants to be seen for what she wants to be seen for instead of what people kind of tend to default her to, I guess.
That sounds fantastic.
So that's my hope. I hope that people read it and at some point while they're reading it, they forget Ellie's in a wheelchair. You know, like they can get lost in the story. You know, she wants to be a baker and she writes letters to famous chefs when she tries out their recipes, and, you know, she makes some unfortunate decisions, and it's all the things that you want in a good story. She just also happens to have CP. So that's
It's interesting. We spoke with a young author named Melissa Shang on this podcast last spring in season 1. And she had also written a book about a middle school girl in a wheelchair. She herself is in a wheelchair. And her motivation for writing the book was that she felt isolated and that she never got to read a book where the characters were like her. And she felt that when a book was about someone who had a disability, that the characters were either used to sort of bring enlightenment to the main character. You know, they were like supporting characters who were bringing, you know, enlightenment to the
They're like the after
the main
school
character.
special. Yeah.
Exactly. Or the focus of the story was the disability itself. And she said, I just wanted to read a book where someone was like me and I could identify with that character, and it was a main character. But the point of the book wasn't her disability. It wasn't about the disability. It was just her being a normal kid. She happened to have this disability, but the book was just about her being a middle school child. And, and it's just, she is an amazing young woman, so wise beyond her years. And I am so happy that more talented writers like you and like Melissa are out there doing this, because it means so much to so many people.
Well, I'm just glad I can do it. And, you know, I'm so glad Melissa wrote what she wrote, because it's so important. Like, I can write what I can do and I can tell the story as best I can. But if she can tell it in her own voice, I mean, that's so much the better, you know?
Well, there's room for all of it. And I think it has to happen. We need more of it. So it needs to happen, you know, via a whole bunch of different authors for an extended period of time, you know, for the culture to really change. The more boots on the ground, the better, I say.
Yeah.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much for spending your precious time with us today. I know you're very busy, and I really appreciate your vast wisdom. I want to have you back on the show because I know we talked about some of these communication challenges that parents have with nonverbal children, and I know you have so much to share there. So I hope you're ready to come back.
Oh, you know me. I'd be happy to. I can talk for a lot longer than this.
Well, fantastic. For our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about this topic or similar topics, and you have a Torchlight account, I encourage you to log in to Torchlight and check out the e-guides called Transitioning to Special Education and Determining Preschool Readiness. We also have a webinar related to this topic coming in March of 2019 called Determining Preschool and Kindergarten Readiness. So I encourage you all to visit our webinars page while you're in there to check that out. If you'd like to know more about Jamie or her work, you can visit her website at jamie-sumner.com, and I will have that posted in our show notes so you can get the exact spelling of that. That's all for now. See you all in season 3 of the Exceptional Parenting Podcast.
Thanks for listening to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast. Find this and other episodes on iTunes, Spreaker, and Podcast Go. If you're interested in bringing Torchlight Child or any of Torchlight's other caregiving products to your workplace, please contact info@torchlight.care. That's info@torchlight.care.